The witness closed the folder and settled back in their seat, the courtroom suspended in a silence so heavy it felt alive, electric with the weight of revelation. They spoke once more, voice measured and resolute. "I'm not here to rewrite history or destroy careers. I'm here to peel back the illusion. A system built on curated faces, polished reputations, and strategic visibility." Usher's presence wasn't accidental. It was choreographed. His silence didn't just follow. The narrative, it upheld it. There was no theatrics, no call for verdicts, only the quiet, crushing power of truth laid bare. The jury's eyes were fixed, the press silent, the judge inscrutable behind her glasses. All eyes remained on Usher's name, echoing with new meaning. "This isn't about blame," the witness continued softly. "It's about understanding how silence becomes armor for predators, and how even innocence, when repeated, becomes complicity." They paused, letting the finality roar louder than any words. Then they stepped off the stand, one deliberate step at a time, leaving behind the echo of every hidden room, every hush of horror, every face that hid behind a famous name. No fans cheered, no gasps broke. Instead, the silence that followed was different, not void, but brimful of consequence. Because now, everyone in that room knew, reputation is not innocence. Silence is not protection. And hidden behind every star-studded smile, there may lie a shadow who stood guard until someone pulled the curtain back. And finally, called it out. The testimony was over, but the reckoning had just begun. The witness paused, eyes sweeping across the courtroom. Their tones softened yet sharpened, carrying the full weight of truth. This isn't about tearing anyone down, it's about lifting the veil, about showing how polished smiles and golden reputations can be part of a carefully constructed illusion. People like Usher, beloved, trusted, placed at the front to shield what happens behind closed doors. When he stood there, silent, he wasn't just a guest, he was the gatekeeper of that silence. A hush swept through the room. No whispers, no movements, just the electric charge of realization. The jury's faces were unreadable. The press hushed in awe. The witness closed their eyes briefly, as if letting years of memories settle. Then they opened them wide. Voice resonant. "You don't need to commit crimes to enable them. You just need to stand by and do nothing." And now that the silence has been broken, everyone here has a choice. Ignore it and let the cost fall on others, or face the truth and let it change how this world operates. There was no dramatic mic drop, no applause. Just the sound of heavy breathing and beating hearts. In that moment, the meaning of everything shifted. This trial was no longer just about an incident or an empire, it was about exposure, responsibility, and the beginning of accountability for all who stood silent. The verdict wasn't given yet, but the legacy of what had just unfolded would outlive the jury's decision. The shadow was lifted, and in the light, consequences awaited. They paused, giving the weight of those words room to settle. A long silence followed, the kind of silence that marks the end of an era and the beginning of accountability. Then, softly but deliberately, the witness rose from the stand. "I've said enough," they concluded, "but I'll say this once more. If we don't hold every person who closes their eyes, every golden face, every shield of smile, responsible, then we're just reinforcing the same system." Every head in the courtroom turned, jurors, attorneys, media, even the judge, at that final line. Spoken not in defiance, but with the quiet certainty of one who has already borne witness to too many secret truths. The witness walked out slowly. No one applauded, no one whispered. They released a breath the courtroom hadn't noticed they were holding. Outside, cameras flashed on the plaza. Legal analysts hurried toward microphones. Media choppers circled above. But inside, the courtroom remained suspended in that space between silence and sound, the yawning gap where justice could finally take hold. The judge looked down at her notes, then at the prosecutor. "As of now, we are not just reviewing charges," she said quietly. "We are reviewing a culture. This trial will continue, but let today be marked not just in the record but in history." The gavel struck, and in that moment, behind those closed doors, more than one empire trembled, and more than one legacy began to unravel. They paused, giving the weight of those words room to settle. A long silence followed, the kind of silence that marks the end of an era and the beginning of accountability. Then, softly but deliberately, the witness rose from the stand. "I've said enough," they concluded, "but I'll say this once more. If we don't hold every person who closes their eyes, every golden face, every shield of smile, responsible, then we're just reinforcing the same system." Every head in the courtroom, jurors, attorneys, media, even the judge, turned at that final line. Spoken not in defiance, but with the quiet certainty of someone who has already borne witness to too many hidden truths. The witness walked away. No applause, no whispers. They released a breath the courtroom hadn't realized it was holding. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted. Journalists jockeyed for position. Social media ignited with hashtags like #culture-of-silence and #shadows-no-more. Legal analysts scrambled across live feeds, dissecting each word. Opinion pieces began popping up, when iconic faces protect a predator. Read one headline. Hollywood's mask has fallen, declared another. Cassie followed with a terse public statement. Thank you to the courageous voices inside that room. Today started reckoning. Now let's finish it. Jamie Foxx's rep confirmed he's reviewing all evidence, hinting at private legal action. Usher remained silent and with the court's bombshell revelations about his presence and proximity. Questions about his role in the system loomed louder than ever. Legal experts noted the courtroom's energy shift, the judge's warning to Diddy, and this testimony signified a turning point. Now, witnesses would feel emboldened, defense tactics undermined. Future testimonies would fall under a harsher lens. And cover-up charges tampering, conspiracy stood front and center. On social media, truth seekers and survivors celebrated. Critics, however, cautioned against premature judgments, calling for due process for all named, but consensus held firm. Something had snapped. Inside the courtroom, the judge cleared her voice and called everyone to order. We'll reconvene. At 10 a.m. tomorrow, counsel, prepare your rebuttal evidence. Witnesses, be ready. And the jury, your duty remains. We move forward not just in this case, but in the larger pursuit of justice. The gavel struck. In that moment, more than one empire, models of fame, unchecked power, and celebrity saviors. Legacies once untouchable were now unraveling. They stepped down, the storm of revelation trailing in their wake. Courtroom doors closed. Silence settled deeper now, heavy with the tremor of accountability. Outside, camera flashes erupted. Reporters converged like feverish bees, capturing every expression. Cassie's steely composure, Jamie's somber counsel, Usher's measured restraint, Diddy's still masked now, showing stains of uncertainty. Social media ignited in real time, trending tags, #culture of silence, #Usher questioned, #shadows no more. Opinion columns rallied, some calling for immediate fallout, others urging patience for due process. By midday, public pressure was unmistakable. Streaming services paused appearances tied to Diddy's empire. Sponsors quietly withdrew lines from his ventures. Attorneys initiated new civil suits. Meanwhile, the judge's admonition echoed. This isn't just about one man, it's about structural betrayal. Enabled by silence, in secluded spaces, other witnesses, emboldened by courtroom candor, exchanged messages. If they said it, I can too. Soon, testimonies began stacking, artists, assistants, former staffers stepping forward to reveal their own fragments of that hidden world. Journalists dug into the security log involving Usher. Some defended him, a young man, ensnared in a larger machine. Others saw it as indicia. Proximity equals responsibility. Legal experts debated the line between knowledge and complicity. Diddy's defense teetered. Their once playbook routinely invoked procedural delays and technicalities now faltered under substantive evidence. Jury sentiment, carefully shielded from external opinion, showed subtle shifts. Those lean-ins tightened eyes, and pens paused, all spoke volumes. As dusk fell, the courtroom emptied but remained echoing. It would reconvene tomorrow, but the weight of the day had already sunk in. The trial had transformed, from probing an incident to exposing the vaults of concealed abuse, abuses upheld by fame, protected by smiling shields, and perpetuated by collective silence. Across Hollywood, late-night hosts barely contained their shock. Fans were conflicted. Could stars they admired be entwined in such darkness? Platforms suspended old content, and legacy sales for those named began declining. At the center of it all, the quiet but unbreakable truth remained. Silence isn't neutrality, it's the mechanism that perpetuates abuse. And now, the ruin of that silence had begun. Tomorrow, the court would hear more. But even before the gavel fell again, the message was clear. The walls of illusion were being dismantled, piece by piece, and nothing would ever be the same. They left the stand, each step a testament to what had just unraveled, a reckoning. In motion, the courtroom doors sealed behind them, but silence didn't return. It deepened, thick with the tremor of truth, now impossible to ignore. Outside, the world exploded. Flashing cameras lit up faces in the throng. Cassie's ironclad resolve, Jamie's grief-etched calm, Usher's composed restraint, and Diddy with his mask of poise now cracking, revealing something raw behind the stillness. Social media roared. #culture of silence surged. #Usher questioned, trended. #shadows no more echoed globally. Think pieces erupted. Some demanded immediate consequences. Others pleaded for measured due process. By evening, the tremors rippled through every corner of entertainment. Sponsors pulled endorsements tied to Diddy's empire. Once vaunted streaming platforms quietly shelved his projects. Civil suits began sprouting like wildfire. Everywhere you looked, the question hung in the air. If these revelations were true, what else was buried? Back in court, the judge's earlier warning reverberated like a bell. This trial had transcended one man's fate. It struck at the heart of an industry built on silence. Other once unspoken witnesses, now emboldened, reached out. If they've said it, I can too. More testimonies were being drafted, prepared for release. Legal analysts watched the jury carefully. Their earlier subtleties leaned in postures. Sharpened pens, tightly held expressions had begun shaping into something more profound. Verdicts would hinge not just on the night in question, but on decades of hidden influence, pervasive intimidation, and strategic silence. In the labyrinth of Hollywood boardrooms and green rooms, old alliances were evaporating. Late-night talk, show monologues stumbled over their words. Fan communities splintered in heated debate. Was their beloved idol a victim, a perpetrator, or something in between? At the epicenter, Diddy stood unmoving, but his empire of influence and silence was visibly fracturing. What had once been unassailable, the smiling veneer, the curated image, the backstage exclusivity was now weakening with every new revelation. Tomorrow, court resumes. More witnesses will testify. Each will chip away at the walls of illusion, layer by layer. More industries might crack open in their aftermath. But one fact stands firm. Silence isn't innocence, it's complicity. And that complicity is now being dismantled. Want a breakdown of upcoming legal risks? Usher's camp's next legal move, or how Hollywood power dynamics are being transformed? Just asked. They walked away from the stand. Their departure felt like the final chord in a symphony dissonant. Undeniable, the air in the courtroom remained suspended, saturated with the gravity of what had just been exposed. When that afternoon's session adjourned, the courthouse spilled into the real world and everything shifted. Outside, the atmosphere crackled. Paparazzi flashes became bonfires of attention on a sea of faces. Cassie's quiet, unyielding presence. Jamie, stoic with loss and resilience. Usher, still and unreadable. Diddy, outwardly composed, yet visibly hollow behind the veneer of control. The tags surged. Hashtag culture of silence, and hashtag Usher questioned, and hashtag shadows no more dominated timelines. Headlines splintered across streaming screens. Some demanded immediate action. Others urged cooler heads and respect for due process. By dusk, the tremor of revelations had rippled through entertainment's core. Brand sponsors withdrew from Diddy-affiliated ventures. Streaming platforms quietly delayed or shelved his latest music and content. Civil suits multiplied, like mushrooms after rain. The question loitered everywhere. If all of this is true, what else? Inside the courtroom's echo chamber, the judge's earlier admonishment about tampering with evidence and suppressing voices reverberated like a gavel strike that tore through the façade. With the spotlight turned on deception and manipulation, other witnesses who'd stayed silent for fear were emboldened. If they can say it, so can I. From the jury box, those lean-in gestures, poised pens, clenched jaws once subtle made sense in full. Their attention wasn't just on the alleged events, but on the entire architecture of control, intimidation, and curated silence. Elsewhere, Hollywood reconfigured in real time. Job offers were rescinded from those tied to Diddy's empire. Late-night comedians stumbled to reframe the narrative. Fan communities fractured, divided between shock, disbelief, empathy, and betrayal. Was this moment about healing? Retribution? At the epicenter, Diddy remained stoic, shielded, fissured. The empire that once thrived on opacity and influence now showed cracks too deep to ignore. Tomorrow, testimony continues. More voices will step forward. Each new account will carve away another block in the fortress of silence. One truth already stands firm. Silence isn't innocence. It's complicity, and that complicity are watching it being dismantled. They stepped down from the stand. In the room, exhaled finally, but too late. The walls had been breached. A hush clung to everything, heavy and insistent, as though the courtroom itself refused to ignore what it had absorbed. By the end of the day, this trial had ceased being about one man. It had evolved into a reckoning of an entire machine, protected by silence and star-studded facades. The name of Usher, once unassailable, now sat in the crosshairs of a culture long protected by untouchable reputations. The public was left grappling with a question that no celebrity could spin away. What happens when silence isn't secrecy, but complicity? More witnesses, bigger names, whispers hint at other influential figures, women and men who could speak. To Diddy's private circles, each new testimony carries the potential to further unravel the empire. Civil lawsuits multiply. Former artists, models, staffers, victims may now feel empowered to take legal action. Expect waves of defamation, assault, and emotional distress claims to surface. Hollywood reckoning intensifies. Sponsors are reassessing who they align with. Brands tied to Diddy and linked figures are distancing themselves. Production companies are pressing pause on projects tied to implicated names. Usher's repercussions loom even without direct allegations. His role as a silent enabler invites scrutiny. His team faces monumental decisions: apology, statement denial, distancing, or full transparency. Legal strategy shift. The judge's warning about obstruction signals that the defense can't rely on procedural tactics indefinitely. If evidence suppression continues, personal sanctions, contempt charges, or even a spoliation inference before the jury could follow. The trial's final session closed with a weight that no one could ignore. What began as a high-profile legal spectacle had transformed into something far more profound, a public dismantling of the silence, power, and complicity that protected not just one man, but an entire culture. The witness's voice no longer echoed at Lingard, not just in the courtroom, but in the press, in social feeds, in the quiet conversations people now dared to have. Diddy sat motionless as the gavel fell, but the world outside didn't wait. In the days that followed, investigations widened, not just into Diddy, but into executives, partners, and gatekeepers who kept the system sealed. More voices emerged, once silenced by fear or contracts. Now, stepping forward with their own truths, Usher's name, once synonymous with clean fame, was now etched into a conversation about passive complicity and the cost of staying silent. The public shifted, no longer satisfied with glamour or press statements. They wanted transparency, accountability, change. This wasn't just a legal trial, it was a cultural one. A mirror held up to an industry, a warning to those who thought silence could still shield them. The court had spoken. But more importantly, so had the truth.